Good evening, esteemed guest, panelist, and presenter. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's gathering. I am Chantal Mullen, your moderator for this evening's event. We have an exceptional presentation in store for you, accompanied by a distinguished panel of community leaders. Tonight's focus revolves around the diverse perspectives within the Black voter community, understanding their values, what motivates them to vote. As we find ourselves amidst election season, with 237 days remaining until Tuesday, November 5th, 2022, the importance of this discussion cannot be overstated. Despite the recent elections, it often feels as though we are continually in the middle of a campaign season, constantly bombarded with requests for our vote. It's imperative to recognize the various factors that drive individuals to participate in the electoral process. There are different issues holding significance for different voters. Our agenda tonight includes delving into insightful research on Black voters, followed by perspectives from our esteemed panel on how their efforts will shape the future landscape. Before we commence, I extend heartfelt appreciation to our partner organizations whose support has made this event possible. I would like to start by saying thank you to those partners and having a partner roll call and have them bring greetings tonight. We will start with Bridget Grant from Kappa Omega. Welcome, Madam President. Oh, you are muted. You are muted. There you go.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to bring greetings tonight. Thank you to Chantel, to Chantel for putting this event together, because as she stated, it's very vital that our voices are heard and that we speak to those who are need some help in understanding what's taking place. So on behalf of Kappa Omega, the oldest chapter in the South Atlantic region of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, we bring you greetings, and we are excited in this partnership. In any way that we can assist, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, President Grant. Next, we will hear from Anitra Duckett, President of Rho Mu Omega, chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Good evening.
Good evening, Chantel. Good evening. As Chantel stated, I am Anitra Duckett, President of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Rho Mu Omega Chapter. Greetings to my sister president, Bridget Grant, and my sorority sisters from Kappa Omega Chapter, and to Sharon Royster, our Divine Nine sisters from Sigma Gamma Rho. I am excited, and on behalf of Rho Mu Omega Chapter, to partner with Sisters Vote, Sisters Lead, Georgia Stand Up, and Georgia Wand in this ever so important topic of voting. We want you to understand that the time is now. We should be informed, educated about not some of the issues, but all of the issues. The time is now for us to come together, to energize and mobilize. Time for us to understand the power that we have and the power of our vote. Thank you to the panel in advance for the knowledge that you will share and impart upon us this evening as we prepare to go to the polls and cast our ballots. My hope and prayer is that each of us walk away from this event better educated, informed, and most importantly, impacted and empowered. Thank you again, and greetings from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, President Duckett. We appreciate you joining us this evening. Next, we will have Sharon Royster, President of Zeta Tau Sigma chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. Welcome.
Welcome.
Uh-oh. Sister Royster, you are muted. Can you? Uh-oh. Hold on one moment. Let me get you unmuted. There you go.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having this wonderful and important discussion with your esteemed panelists tonight. I bring you greetings from Zeta Tau Sigma chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. We serve Prince George's County, Maryland. I look forward to hearing all of the wonderful information that you all will share. And I echo the sentiments of my sister Greek presidents. This is important information that we all need to hear. We need to be informed so that we can make decisions that impact our communities in a positive way. And so thank you again for allowing us to partner with you. And I look forward to tonight's event.
Thank you, Sister Royster. We appreciate you being here and being a partner with us this evening as well. Next, we will have Holly Holliday, President of Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote.
Good evening, and it is a pleasure to be here with you. As she said, my name is Holly Holliday. I'm the president of Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote. I am also a proud member of Rho Mu Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and serve as their connection and social action chair. We too understand that it is not only is the information important, but all of your voices are important. And we encourage you to not only absorb the information that you will hear tonight, but be prepared to use it to fuel what we need to do in order to get our community out to vote. I appreciate all of the other presidents who are joining me on this call, as well as my sisters, executive officers, Deborah Scott and Kim Scott, and I cannot wait for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Holly. We appreciate you being a partner with us this evening. Next, we have our partner, Deborah Scott, Chief Executive Officer of Georgia Stand Up. Welcome, Sister Deborah.
Hello. Well, I am so happy to be here. I'm actually at another conference, but I pulled away so I can be here with you all. I am the CEO of Georgia Stand Up, which is a think and act tank for working communities. We have been around for 20 years and we do a lot of work on the ground. So when we're talking about knocking on doors, calling people, standing at the polls, having parties at the polls, we're all about trying to get our people registered, educated, and out to vote. So I am happy to join all of you here. And I am a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Kappa Omega, and proud of Sweet Alpha Pi as well.
Thank you, Sister Deborah. We appreciate you being a partner as well. And last but not least, our partner, Kimberly Scott, Executive Director of Georgia WAN. Welcome, Sister Kimberly.
Thank you, Chantel, and to Holly, Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote. Again, my name is Kim Scott. I'm the Executive Director for Georgia WAND. WAND is W-A-N-D. It stands for Women's Actions for New Directions. We are an environmental social justice nonprofit organization based here in Atlanta. We work statewide advocating for nuclear harm reduction, environmental and climate social justice for our frontline communities in Southeast Georgia, but also our energy burden communities in City of Atlanta's Neighborhood Planning Unit V. And so happy to be here. We've been also around for a long time, almost 40 years, doing grassroots organizing, civic engagement, and just making sure that people have a place and a platform for their voices to be heard. So excited to be part of this conversation as well.
Thank you for being one of our partners this evening. We appreciate all of our partners. They have made tonight's event possible. Just before we get into our presentation, I'd like to make just a brief announcement. Should you have any questions for our distinguished presenter, Dr. Katrina Gamble, or our esteemed panelists, we ask that you please utilize the chat function. Please remember to preface your question with the word question in all caps for clarity. Thank you for your cooperation, and we will now proceed to tonight's presentation, which will be led by the esteemed Dr. Katrina Gamble. Dr. Katrina Gamble is the founder and CEO of Sojourn Strategies, an all-woman-run social impact consulting firm that drives advocacy campaigns and philanthropic dollars on issues related to equity, justice, and democracy. She has been a key architect of powerful social justice campaigns and projects, from the first ever National Prosecutor Accountability Hub that laid the groundwork to elect progressive prosecutors from Philadelphia to St. Louis, to pro-democracy advocacy campaigns that have restored voting rights to over 280,000 people. She's co-led groundbreaking research to better understand the intersections within the Black electorate based on values, identity, and political attitudes. You'll hear more about that tonight. She's contributed political commentary to outlets such as Forbes and NBC News. Before working in the social justice advocacy space, she was an assistant professor in political science at Brown University, where she taught and conducted research on race, gender, and identity politics. She holds a doctorate and an MA in political science from Emory University. Let's all please welcome Dr. Katrina Gamble. Welcome, Dr. Gamble.
Thank you. It is so incredible to be here. Thank you, Chantel, and all of the sponsoring organizations. And it is just an incredible honor to share space and to be in conversation with you all tonight.
Thank you. We are so looking forward to your presentation. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen to get us started. Are you all able to see the slides there?
Not yet. It says you started sharing, but they have not loaded.
Okay. Oh,
there we go.
Okay, there we go. So as it has already been shared, I am going to spend some time talking about the title of this conversation is that Black voters are not a monolith, which I'm sure for many of us who are in this space that is quite obvious, but we're going to that what that assumption has meant in terms of what it how people engage and think about and mobilize Black voters, and how there are tools and information and ways that we can disrupt that typical narrative in terms of how people think about engaging Black voters, and do it in a way that actually not only mobilizes our communities, but also does it in a way that allows us to build lasting political power within the Black community. Before I dive into the research, I want to just set some context about what we know, where we are right now. And as I said, one of the things when we think about a lot of the research that's done when you're seeing national polling, even exit polls, oftentimes that research is done in a way where the vast majority of the people that are being polled and asked questions are white, and they will do something that that pollsters often call an oversample where they'll add an additional 100 or few of a certain community, Black people, to tell us some information. One of the things that's important to know about when research is conducted that way, it only allows you to know information about a community to a certain degree, because it's not conducted in a way that allows us to understand the nuances and the intersections with community. It can tell us something about Black people, but it can't tell us a lot of information about the differences among Black people. And when we're trying to think about how do we engage and organize and mobilize people in ways that is responsive to their perspectives and interests, having that level of detail is incredibly important. Another important thing is that when we think about when there is research that's done to try to understand the Black community, it's often done in a way where the intersections are only done by looking at demographics, age, gender, income, which are important differences. But when we think about how we're trying to understand how people think about the democratic process, whether or not they choose to engage in elections or not engage in elections, we have to push past those demographic measures to understand people's values, their political attitudes, and how they're thinking about the political process and the small d democratic process. The other thing I wanted to elevate in terms of what we know right now, in terms of our elections that are in front of us, there's increased information about the enthusiasm gap among the Black voters. There's lots of people having discussions about whether or not our communities will turn out, who they will turn out for, are there shifts in people's ideology, and what that will mean for the outcomes of the elections. One thing I will say, and I know you all know this, is that the Black vote is core to any election that happens in the United States. How we show up, whether we show up, will have a significant impact on the outcomes of our elections. The Black vote has a lot of power. And I think that is why people are starting to think about this idea of this enthusiasm gap. What do we need to do to get Black voters to turn out? Who are they interested in turning out for? And so some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is why are we starting to see some of these trends around enthusiasm? What are Black voters thinking about the current elections that are coming up, and what that means about how we should move our work to engage the folks in our communities to participate. Another thing I wanted to talk about, I know we're primarily talking about Black voters here. There's also increasing research right now, and young voters in particular across race are really animated around the 2024 elections. There have been a number of surveys over the last few months that have shown that young voters, Gen Z voters, are saying that they plan to vote in the 2024 elections. This is despite only 19% of them actually being contacted by political campaigns, parties, and candidates. And so if you think about, there's already, and that number of folks who have been contacted for young Black people is actually only 16%. So if you think about the interest that exists among young people, young Black people, but the gap in terms of who's talking to them and who's communicating to them, there's huge opportunities to make them also a significant player in the elections coming up in 2024. One thing I wanted to highlight before I dig into the research is that when we think about how research is typically done around civic engagement and get out the vote programs and the political industry, the things that are missing and that our research is really trying to solve for is the who. So as I said, if we want to message people and talk to people, engage people and organize folks, we need to know who they are. And we need to know who they are beyond the surface level of just their race, or even just their race and their gender. What are their values? What are the things that are motivating them? What are the things that keep them up at night that is going to get them engaged and want to be a part of the democratic process? And also the why. When we move past demographic measures, allows us to understand, why are people thinking about the elections in this way? If they're cynical or disillusioned, why are they disillusioned? That helps us understand how to move them. How do we activate them? How do we give them hope? How do we increase their sense of power? And I really wanted to talk about this idea of power, because there has been research that we've worked on with a number of partners over the last few years that have shown that Black voters' perception of power is directly correlated with whether or not they are likely to vote. The more they believe that their vote has power, the more likely they are to vote. And so I think it's really important for us to think about our work of not only how do we turn out Black voters and mobilize and educate them, but how do we make them understand their power in our electoral process? I want to talk a little bit about our research, and it says why clustering Black voters, and just so folks understand what clustering means, is exactly what I said. Is we do a survey, and then we find segments within a particular community, in this instance, Black people. So we kind of create personas within that community where folks are sorted not just by their demographics, but by their values, by their political attitudes, how they see the world, what issues are important to them. And the reason why that is important is, one, the things that we talked about. It allows us to understand their why. Two, it allows us to be more targeted in our messaging in terms of who we're talking to and what we're asking them to do. I'll get into that a bit more. And it allows us to tap into how do we increase political power. If we are really trying to build power in our communities, we have to understand the differences and the nuances and we can't talk to everyone as if they're the same, as if they have the same perspective, as if their starting point is the same. And just to demonstrate a bit about this idea of power, the slide that you're looking at here is from data that was done in Georgia. Appropriately, we're here in Georgia. And it's research that Hit Strategies, who co-created the Black Values research that I'm going to talk about tonight, did with New Georgia Project. And they did this research over in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And the question was, what do you see? It is a question that measures their perception of power. The thing that I want you to pay attention to is if you look at 2020, 73% of Black people in Georgia thought that their vote was extremely powerful. If you think about what was going on in 2020, it was a major election. Georgia was a key battleground state. It was going to determine the Senate, and Black voters were getting inundated with messages. People were talking to them all the time. They knew that their vote had power because people were paying attention to them and they were listening to them. And then if you look at 2021, it immediately dropped down to 46%. And that's because people got what they wanted, the vote, and then they disappeared, and that it immediately dropped. And then there was like a bump again in 2022 to 55%. And so, but you had to work to build that back up. And so one of the things I want to emphasize too is the way in which we treat voters as like in a transactional way. We show up, we ask them to do something, and we disappear. That has like real impact on how they think about their own power in the elections, and also how they might think about the political process as a place where they can actually have impact. So to the meat of what I want to talk about, as I mentioned, in late 2022, we did research where we surveyed registered Black voters across the country, and we conducted a segmentation analysis. And what we found was there are 5 primary segments within the Black community. And I want to walk through those with you all tonight. The first is what we call the legacy civil rights cohort. They are 30% of the Black electorate. They tend to be older. They vote at a very high percent. 78% of this cohort is likely to vote in almost all elections. They have a very strong sense that their vote has power. When you ask them, is it important to honor their ancestors, they say yes. And the way that they think that the most important way they can do that is by voting. They think one of their most important issues is voting rights and democracy issues. This is a cohort who is going to show up and vote no matter what, and they know who they're going to vote for. There was a question in this survey that said, how long are you willing to wait in line to vote? This cohort was like 3+ hours. They're like, I'm here. I'm going to make sure I vote no matter what. One thing I will note is that when you think about some of the messaging that's targeted at Black voters writ large, it is often talking to this voter, right? It's leaning into messages around voting rights and the important civil rights history around voting, which is obviously really important. However, this segment, they are already going to vote. They are going to show up, they're going to vote no matter what, and they know who they're going to vote for. The second segment that I want to talk about is what we call the aspirational activists. They are about 13%. They're the most educated. They're the more likely to have women. They have the highest level of income. They are turnout just below the legacy civil rights voters. They all are activated around things beyond voting. They're more likely to participate in protest actions, and they're really like justice and movement oriented. They're also very likely to vote and participate. The two segments that I really want to spend a bit more time on is one, what we call the next gen optimists. They are primarily millennials and Gen X, so they're younger. They have a very high sense and trust in like information and institutions. They have a very strong sense of Black solidarity. They identify as like ideologically moderate, and but they have a much lower likelihood of voting. By all measures, they're very similar to the legacy civil rights. They like have a high sense of, that their vote matters. They have high trust. They think that voting is an important way to create change, but they have a very low turnout rate. And part of that is because they don't have enough information. I like to say that this segment is kind of the low-hanging fruit. Those are the people, where I said only 19% have been contacted. These are the people that if we actually did the work of talking to them and letting them know that there's an election, where they need to go cast their ballot and how to do that, they are likely to turn out and vote because they want to and they see the power of voting. The next one I want to talk about is what we call the rightfully cynical. And we intentionally add the word rightfully in front of the word cynic because this segment it's the youngest cohort. They have a very low sense that their vote has power. They have some sense of like connection to the Black community, but they have a very low income and education. They tend to be more independent. They don't have a strong opinion about Biden or Trump or the Republicans or Democrats. And they think that they show up and they don't see anything being delivered back to their communities. We often say that this is the cohort that's closest to the pain, and they don't necessarily see the tangible results of what their voting and showing up is turning into for themselves and their families and their communities. Their top issue is the economy, and they are 29% of the Black electorate. And I like to emphasize this because this cohort, I always say, is it's not only about whether or not they would turn out in this election. Their deep cynicism and disillusionment with the political process means that they're really on the verge of checking out of the small d democratic process because they don't see it as something that is delivering for them and their communities. And the last cohort, which is about 7%, is what we call the race neutral conservatives. They're primarily men, married men. They have a low solidarity with the Black community. They're less likely to, there was a question that says, are you more likely to identify as Black or American? They're more likely to say they identify as American. They tend to be conservative. They have very high favorability for Trump, and they are about 7% of the electorate. One thing I want to point out is if any of you are like kind of following the news and people are saying, oh, there's this drift of how many people are maybe shifting away from the Democratic Party or being more conservative, and that number is much higher than 7%. The place where people are more likely to have ideological shifts is in that rightfully cynical. It's like those are people who are likely they haven't seen things change, and they're looking at their choices and they're trying to figure out how can they do something that's going to have an impact on their communities. That could be not showing up, or that could be making other choices at the ballot. I wanted to spend a little bit more time digging in on this rightfully cynical category. They, as I mentioned, they have a very low level of sense that their vote has power. But being Black is really important to their identity. So they do have a good sense of collective identity, and community is really important with them. They are really unsatisfied with the direction of the country. And like I said, they have a very low turnout rate relative to the other personas in the segmentation analysis. Because this demographic in particular, I think is so important for us to figure out the way forward on, we actually did some research where we tried to better understand the rightfully cynical group by doing some surveys and focus groups in Ohio ahead of the elections that they had last year in November. And so I want to really quickly run through some of the things that we found and then talk about some of the recommendations coming off of the segmentation research, as well as this research that we did in Ohio. One of the things that, and I just said this, they bought by far 62% think that the country is going in the wrong direction. So they think that there's a problem, things are not going well, they don't see things going well for them. And so that is like a driving factor for this particular segment. And in Ohio, that was even more so for women and young people within the cynical segment. The other thing that is really interesting when we dug into this segment with our research in Ohio is that we knew that they had high levels of distrust among politicians, but this segment also has high levels of distrust in general. When you ask them, would you say that most people could be trusted? 84% of them said no. So they have low levels of trust, not only with political institutions, but people in general. But there's hope. We also asked them, you know, how hopeful or worried are you about the future? For the folks who said that they were hopeful, the two things that I really want you to pay attention to, the two things that gave this segment hope was their faith and their relationships with their friends and their family. So those are important things for us to know when we think about, okay, how do we move these folks past cynicism to action? How do we engage them? Who should talk to them? So I'm going to run through some recommendations based off the research. One, when you're thinking about Black voters and we're trying to have them have a sense of power, we have to show them the receipts and connect the dots to demonstrate tangible progress. It's not enough to say that the Inflation Reduction Act passed. You have to demonstrate to them how that policy impacted them, someone they know, someone in their community. How do they access the resources that come from a particular policy change? Do they know someone who got relief through executive order around student loan debt? They have to see the tangible connections to how their voting translated into change within their communities. One, activate the legacy civil rights and aspirational cohorts to mobilize other cohorts. Sure, we can talk to them about voting, but those groups are already going to vote. What more can we ask of them to do? They probably have a niece or a nephew or a grandson who's a cynic. Can we arm them with messages to talk to them about why their vote has power? To increase perceptions of power, we have to demonstrate that Black voters are political agents. They are in control of their destiny. They are centered as the hero in the story. You voted, this happened, your community got this. It's not necessarily about the candidate, it's about them, how their action translated into a benefit for their community. And then a couple of other quick recommendations specifically for the rightfully cynical group. Because this is highly distrustful, it is really important to identify trusted messengers. Who are individuals and people within their social networks who can communicate to them in a way that taps into them and lets them know that they have power and that they will actually listen to. Blanket messaging from people that they don't trust or respect are likely to not have an impact for this particular segment. The other thing that we learned from the Ohio research is that of the cynics, the younger ones have a lower level of education. It's really important to meet people where they are. They are because they have a lower level education, they're not likely to be college educated. What are innovative ways that we can find those young people in community colleges? Are they gig workers or service workers? And like, how can we design programs to find them where they are and to talk to them about voting and being engaged? When we're talking about the rightfully cynics, we can't shame them into participation. Their cynicism is based off of their own perceptions and experience in the world. And so we have to acknowledge that frustration and then talk to them about how their own individual power gives them ability to have an impact on things that they care about, that they're worried about, that they want to change for themselves, their families, and their communities. That part I think is really important. This is not a cohort where we're going to say, if you don't vote, you're so apathetic, you're disengaged, this is what you have to show up, or this thing is going to happen. That's not likely to move them. You have to say, yes, I know that you've showed up before and some things have changed, but not everything has changed. But here's a moment where when you voted, this thing happened. And this is an opportunity. This is a way for you to show up in community and have an impact with together. And then the other thing, especially with the young cynics, is to find places where they can observe progress. They do actually are interested in connecting to community. So are there community spaces? There are a number of organizations that are part of this, sponsoring this organization. How do we bring them into those places where they can see working in collective actually demonstrates progress, and they can have an impact, and they can begin to understand their own sense of power within the political process. And that is where I'm going to stop. And if open it up to questions here or go to the panels.
Thank you, Dr. Gamble. There's the chat has been hot, girl, while you were.
Oh, I wasn't looking at it while.
That's okay. That's okay. We've got your questions. We've got you. The one that I keep seeing is they said, "Can we get these slides? Is it possible for us to get the slides?" So she said
I'll
yes.
Be able to share the slides.
Yes. So you have signed up for the event this evening, and we will email it out to everyone who attended this evening. So one question was, how many people did you survey to figure out how to get these 5 groups?
We surveyed 1,000 registered voters, and it was a voter file survey. So it wasn't sometimes online surveys, people self-identify. This was a voter file matched survey. And I should tell folks that we are actually actively in the field now to do a much larger survey that will allow us to refine these segments, where we're going to be surveying 5,000 Black voters nationally. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
More to come. Mm-hmm.
So what are some strategies that you would recommend to disrupt groupthink amongst peers who choose not to vote and inadvertently recruit others and because they don't support any candidate?
The biggest strategy is to understand why they are not wanting to participate. I think if they're falling into that rightfully cynical category, it is probably that they think that it doesn't matter, that they're frustrated. They're like, oh, I vote, nothing changes. Mm-hmm. And so for that particular group, it's really important to demonstrate to them how voting has translated into some type of tangible change. If you can point to an example, did their sister get the child tax credit in 2022? You remember your sister was getting those $600 checks? That is because we voted and we were able to pass this policy that had an impact. You know, or you can even think of local examples. If there are things that has happened at the city level where an election has resulted in some type of tangible policy change that you can point to, that they can understand, and they can see how it's impacted someone that they know or themselves directly.
All right, thank you. Another question is there any research that disaggregates Black voters along ethnic lines?
Not that I have access to, but in this next round of research, we do have some research where we are going to be gathering data around immigration and like ethnic status. So there, we have to do the analysis to see what comes out of that, but not in our existing research.
Okay. We got a number of questions, and I'm gonna try to consolidate some because I see a number of ones around social media. What particular form of social media or news or particular form of media, where it be it news or social media, resonates with the cohorts?
Yeah, so I can't answer that question right now. One thing I do know from the follow-up research that we have done in Ohio is that the one thing I will say is that the who is delivering the message is really important. And I'm saying that because we can't do just like blanket social media ads. I guess one thing I will say is, like, if you're designing social media ads to target these cohorts, design it in a way that is capturing the narratives that's going to speak to that particular segment. So if you can design a digital ad that is speaking to the rightfully cynics, kind of like I said, acknowledging their frustration and then, connecting the dots for them, I think that would be really important.
Okay. How concerned should we be about the role of AI in disinformation campaigns in an attempt to court Black voters?
I think we should be very concerned about the role of disinformation campaigns in particular. I think AI allows folks to ramp that up even more. There's tons of research that shows that a lot of disinformation, and to the point of talking about social media platforms, that they're happening in private Facebook groups and WhatsApp groups that may not even themselves be seen as, they're not overtly political. People are there for different reasons, and people are sharing information that that is likely not correct, and as a way to manipulate voters. And so I think some of the ways to combat that is, one, how do we educate our communities to be able to identify misinformation so they know it when they see it? And second, how are we using those social media spaces to create organic communities where we're speaking to people and sharing our story? What's the story that we want to tell to our community, and how are we creating spaces in those different social media channels to tell those stories that counters what they may be hearing from other folks?
Okay. I think you answered a number of questions in there. Just to circle back, because there's a lot of questions about the rightfully cynical voters. How do we get them more involved in local elections? How do they see themselves in that?
I think that the way to do that is to show them how the local elections connected to something they care about, right? So, for example, if they are really concerned about criminalization reform, decriminalizing marijuana, or like some other issue like that, letting them know that prosecutors in a lot of places are elected, they make decisions about this thing that you care about. You have the ability to put someone in office that has, so they have to not only understand that elections are happening, but what are the roles that those elected officials have over their lives. And so that they can see that voting is one way in which they can exercise their power on something that's important to them.
Okay. Another one around the rightful cynical. Which of the other voter cohorts do you think could have the most impact on the rightfully cynical?
We are actually trying to do some more research to understand that. So I would think that honestly, if given the right messages, either the aspirational activists or the legacy civil rights, but we'll know more in the next round of research which cohorts might be better messengers to the rightfully cynical. But because the rightfully cynical, they have high levels of distrust. They don't trust anyone really, except for their friends and their family. And they also have a high sense of faith. And so if a legacy civil rights person is like their grandmother or their auntie, they are probably good messengers for them, right? Or if an aspirational activist is their, college peer or like work friend, they are probably good messengers for them. So it's like people who are close in and connected to them are going to be good messengers for that segment.
So I'm seeing a number of people ask about TikTok. That's kind of been a theme that, a lot of people are, particularly young people, are getting their information from TikTok, but they're also getting education from TikTok. How do you think the potential ban of TikTok could impact voter education and information?
Yeah, I think it's something we should pay attention to. If that happens, what are the alternative ways in which to communicate with people? While it is an accessible tool, if it continues to be an accessible tool, people should use it. I really think that leaning into culture is an incredible way for us to engage and motivate and educate our communities. Sometimes the starting point for folks can't immediately be go vote, right? Like, what are other ways that we can tell the story of their power in elections, or their ways to work in collective community together that may be done in ways that are like engaging artists, musicians, and things like that. And TikTok, I think, is a great way to do that because they can really zero in and target people based off of particular interests.
Okay. In the interest of time, we're going to do just a couple of more questions. And we are recording all of your questions. We'll be happy to send these to Dr. Gamble to see if maybe she could give us some more information that we could send out to the group as a whole, if that's okay with her. One question involves voters feeling disenfranchised, feeling that there are other voters people being prioritized. For example, there are some protests in Chicago. There are people where the migrants are being placed in their communities. What kind of messaging is possible to re-engage those voters?
Right. Well, first, I think we have to start talking to them. I think some data, again, that was coming into the end of 2023, so hopefully those numbers are high, but Circle from Tufts, they do research with young people, and they found that only 16% of young Black people said they had been contacted from a candidate campaign or political party. So the first thing is we have to talk to them. We have to find them and we have to talk to them. I think the second thing is that like I said before, is that you have to show them the receipts. People need to know how you've delivered for them. I think that's like increasingly becoming important for Black voters. I think just saying, oh, it's really important to vote, you have to show up and vote, this is on the line, will work for some, probably the legacy civil rights. But for others, we have to show them what we have delivered, like what has been delivered for them. Like they need to see tangible things, give them real examples.
Thank you. And so last question, what are some approaches for neutralizing the race-neutral conservatives? We didn't touch on them much, but what is some messaging and approaches around dealing with or neutralizing them?
Right. I mean, to be honest, we haven't done a lot of research into that cohort, so I don't know if I have the right answers for that one, except for just we are, from what we have found so far, that segment of the Black electorate is probably less movable in terms of like ideology and perceptions around ideology and things like that. So yeah, probably the way to neutralize them is to engage and mobilize the other segments of the Black electorate so that they are a larger percentage of what is showing up in November.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Gamble. I'm going to ask you to put your information in the chat. Dr.
Okay.
Gamble has a research firm, and so she is available to do presentations, speak to your groups, dig in a little bit deeper into the data. We always want to support our women-led, our minority-owned businesses. There are very few minorities that are doing this work and focusing on us as a voting base. So we have to make sure that we are supporting these businesses. Thank you, Dr.
Oh, Chantel, I think you muted yourself.
I did. I was saying she is going to be hanging around for a moment. If you feel so inclined, Dr. Gamble, there are questions in the chat if you'd like to respond to some of them in writing.
Yes, thank you so much again for having me. This has been incredible, and I'm excited to hear from the panelists myself. I'm going to learn something tonight for sure.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, we will bring up our panelists. These are some community leaders, they're business leaders, they're social justice leaders, but they're also mothers, aunts, sisters, and friends. They work tirelessly to help make our communities better. So I would like to welcome Ms. Holly Holliday, Reverend Leslie DeWhite, and Holly Holliday is the president of Sisters Lead, Sisters Vote. Reverend Leslie DeWhite is the Minister of Social Justice at Community of Hope AME Church and the Social Action Chair of Zeta Tau Sigma chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. Deborah Scott, Chief Executive Officer of Georgia Stand Up, and Kim Scott, Executive Director of Georgia One. There she is. Awesome. Welcome, panel. Welcome, welcome. And I'm just going to throw this question out and feel free, any of you, to answer it. What was your aha moment tonight as you listened to that presentation? Reverend Leslie.
Yeah, I'll go. I'll just say, first of all, thank you, Dr. Gamble. I have stickies all over the place from that presentation. And there was more that resonated with me from the information that she presented tonight. One of the things that was an aha moment for me was the statement that we have to stop treating voters in a transactional way. And so as a faith leader and as a community leader, we sit in community with the people that we want to vote on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a routine basis. We don't just engage with them when it comes time to election season. And so I think for me, the aha moment was translating that everyday service in community into the reasons and the motivations to, go to the poll, to elevate the issues in the election season, if that makes any sense. That was my aha moment.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll jump in. This has been fascinating, and it's true. As most people know, Georgia Stand Up has been on the ground for a long time. So I can, how they say you have the receipts. Katrina, you dropped some science, and we have the receipts to back up what you're saying. So just to make it plain, we need Pookie to talk to Ray Ray. Okay. We need our cousins to talk to our cousins. We need a big family reunion, and grandma and mama and them need to sit everybody down and say, look here, this is why we need to vote. When we talk about the trusted messengers, we are the trusted messengers. If Black women save the world, we got to start with our own families. Sometimes we have people living under our own roofs that aren't registered to vote. So first of all, we have to make sure everybody gets registered to vote, but then, you know, validating their concerns and listening to them. We do a lot of door knocking, over 500,000 doors during this last election. And what we do is we listen to our community in real time, talk about some of the issues in their community. And if you're the only ambassador for all things good, then people are going to come to you with questions, and we need to be able to answer them. So I think this is really good. We need to probably break it down to bite-sized chunks for our community to say, you know, Auntie, when you're talking to the kids, this is what you're going to talk about, right? But what we're also finding is our youth do not know how to vote, not just that they're not registered. If they're registered, they're embarrassed that they don't know what to do when they go into the voting booth. And so we need to teach that. And then they may have heard about the top of the ticket, but we know all politics are local, and it's really about what happens at the bottom of the ticket as well. The closer they are to the bottom of the ticket, the closer they are to your issues that matter. So we want to make sure that we teach the whole ballot and why those roles are important. And I'll pass the mic.
Any other ahas? Okay, Sister Kimberly.
Okay. So I would say one big aha moment was that I think I have rightful cynics in my family. I just didn't know that. I just know that there was a name for them. But I do agree. One thing that, and I didn't acknowledge my mentor, Deborah Scott, here tonight, but and you know, one thing that she said to me a while ago is that you have to meet people where they are. And I've taken that even with my family with that approach, but also because we have relationships, they believe in me as a trusted messenger. And so I translate that to our civic engagement work at Georgia One. You have to build those relationships and have those relationships with people so that they understand what is really happening. But also we have a responsibility. If you have a C4, you also got to be putting up trusted messengers with these elected officials and these candidates, right? Because what you don't want with your rightful cynic is to come back and say, hey, I told you so. That person, you know, is crooked, or that person is doing this. So we also have a responsibility to vet and to hold these people accountable for things that they're saying on the campaign trail, but also once they get elected, things that they're not saying and things that they aren't doing.
Thank you. Well, Holly, we're gonna get your aha.
Well, you know, I have been working with Katrina and some of her research partners for years and viewed this research many times. So I'm not sure I had an aha moment tonight, but I will say something that occurred to me is that this is us. I will assume that because you are spending your Wednesday night on the call with us when you could be doing anything else, that you are very engaged in what is happening in your community. I think what's important is that we all know these people. And I think what we need to be thinking about is, let's make a list. You know, we actually have the tools that we can connect people with that will tell you who in your contact list is registered to vote, who in your contact list is voting for real or not voting. Those are tools that are accessible to you. Many of them actually are at free or low cost. And so we have to really think about how we're getting in the game. And I would say my aha moment was an affirmation moment that I am excited to be on this call with so many people, because all of you are people who are in the game, and I want to make sure that you all have what you need to be effective in playing the game.
Thank you. Well, that kind of goes to my next question. How can other community organizations collaborate with yours to enhance the impact of voter engagement initiatives based on what we've learned this evening? How do people connect with you and you guys collaborate to get more work done?
All right, so I'm going to jump in. So Georgia Stand Up, we definitely are welcoming partners. And what I call it is the coalition of the willing. If you're willing to do some work, because we're not about performative work, we're not about, just doing it just to do it. We're doing real work on the ground. And so what we want is people who are willing to come and knock on doors, call people. We have the text bank system. You can do it from home. You can call people from home. You could come into the office. You can knock on doors. You can do special events. There are so many activities that we're going to do over the next 6 or 9 months that you can get involved with. And as organizations, we'd love to partner with you. We are once again working all around the state, but we're clustering it in Macon, Columbus, Savannah, Valdosta, in Albany, in Augusta, and then of course in the metro area, and we South Side all the way. So we have plenty of opportunities for people to volunteer. We had whole organizations that came in and embedded themselves with us during the last couple of elections. So we are down for partnerships if it's real, but also to the point that what Holly said is the truth is the resources have not dropped yet in Georgia for grassroots, grass tops, and nonprofits have not received money to do any of the work that we're supposed to be doing right now. So all the plans we have are all behind. And so if they say Black women are going to change the world and save democracy, they better hurry up with the check, because we can't do it on a banana peel. So we implore you to not only organize your people, but also organize your money, because that's what it's about. Power is organized money and organized people moving in the right direction. And that's what this election is about.
I like that. Organized, say that again for me.
Organized money. There's 2 kinds of power: organized money and organized people. And so your churches, sororities, organizations are organized money, because we all pay our dues, right? We pay our tithes. That's an organized body. So we're organizing around churches, we're organizing around organizations, but then also we also have our own families and social clubs. But then how do we spend our money? Are we going to buy sandwiches? So when people say that you can't give out water at the precinct because it's an hour and a half wait, or are we going to go across the street like we do and do a whole party at the polls? We have to fund our own survival. And that's really about getting our people out to vote.
Thank you. Thank you. Any others want to weigh in on how others can collaborate with you?
Yeah, sure. Oh, you want to go, Reverend Dwight?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, sure. We're in this collaborative space as well with partnerships. One of the things that I've noticed that we consistently need help with, especially on the rural side, is rides to the polls, as well as messaging, obviously getting mailers out, because door knocking in rural areas is obviously different from door knocking in urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
So building those partnerships and making sure that, if you have rides to the polls, come on and work with us, because we need that, especially in that Southeast Georgia area where, that's mainly part of our frontline communities, but also organized mail. It is imperative that we get our messaging out early and soon, because we're missing the boat in some of these areas where it's going to be very crucial, especially in Georgia. And Deborah mentioned Macon, but also Augusta. We're talking about Waynesboro. We're talking about all of these areas where people kind of look at Atlanta, but they don't realize that there are some other very battleground areas within the state that need some attention too. So, and that money is important, getting those mailers out, making sure that we're educating and informing people about, what's happening, these elections, the candidates, who's running, their district precincts have changed in some areas and people are not even informed about that. So, that money is key, but also collaborative partnerships, especially in areas where we have to get people to the polls, is also key as well. And so you can join us, info@georgiaone.org, and you can also personally email me, Kim@georgiaone.org, to help us get the word out and get people to the polls, and then get this messaging out about why it's important to vote in this upcoming election.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
my Sisters Lead Sisters Vote is not a direct voter contact organization, but what we focus on is communication and messaging. And so we're really amped up in the fight around mis and disinformation. And so what we try to do is empower people just like all of you on this call to be able to share and spread accurate information about not only what issues are taking place, but to be really, the best way to beat mis and disinformation is to be pro-warned and armed. And so when you really understand what is the infrastructure bill, what's happening with the American Rescue Plan, how many judges have been appointed to the court, what are the judges deciding, what is the approach of the DA, when you know that in advance, when you then are faced with mis and disinformation, then you're like, oh, I know that's not true because I already know how that works. So we're real, which is about civics, certainly 101, but it's deeper than that. It's deeper than that because it's really about understanding current affairs and activities and really what's going on in your own community. So we want to be a catalyst to how to help do that. Of course, Holly has posted our website already. The best place to get the top information is on our social media channels. And so you can follow us as Sisters Lead everywhere on all the things. And, and as you also should follow all of the other organizations here. And I would say on the money front, because I am in lockstep with my sister Deborah, everybody on here got $5. Figure out how you're spending your $5. I'm a graduate of Howard University and I was a student of Ron Walters. And one of the things he said is, those who fund your politics fund what happens in your community. So we should be the funders of our own politics. So if you want to see more of whatever it is you want to see, then I encourage you to think about how you can devote your own resources to that. That's it for me.
Thank you, Holly. And I'll just throw my little 2 cents in. I always tell people politicians pay attention to 2 things, money and votes. Which one do you have? Because that is their currency. And if you don't understand their currency, you miss the mark. Reverend Leslie, did you want to add in before we go to our last question?
The challenge is my big sisters are on here. So I've done this work with Deborah Scott and I've done this work with Holly Holiday. And so everything they say at this point, I could just say ditto. So you can follow us on social media as well. The thing that I would say about partnering with us is that, we need manpower. Right. We are the organizations that are going in community. We are door knocking. We are I think the last election cycle, we sent our young people into the community and we had them door knocking and we gave them money for doing that. We gave them stipends for participating in that work. So if you want to know the kind of resources that support this work, that's a really good example. We do polls to the party. party at the polls situation. We did pop-up parties, right? And the big piece about the pop-up party wasn't, we had food trucks that showed up at different locations or whatever, and it was celebrating people and informing people that that was voting day, it was voting, season. But I think aside from that was airtime in the media to do that education and reach people, in the masses, to kind of let them know not just when voting is, but the ways that they can engage. For me, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, because of the way our system is set up in Maryland, yes, voter registration is important, and I want you to do that in advance, but I'm less concerned about that, and I'm more concerned about you knowing where to vote, because you can register to vote on the day of. And so being able to kind of fund those initiatives that help us to increase awareness and do the education throughout the life cycle of the voting season, I think is really important. And so again, you can follow us on social media as well. And I'll drop those links in the chat.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of go off my script for a little bit, because I have a question in the chat that I wanted to just kind of ask you about, because I know a number of you are in different types of organizations. And so the question is, and this is our last question, around the level of Black 501c4s and PACs. What's their awareness? Kind of describe the landscape of that.
So I'll jump in on this one and say, what organizations can and cannot say is very much controlled by our tax code. And so one of the frustrating things that I have is that people need to understand that from every organization, they're going to give you the best and most accurate information that they can within the limits of the tax code, which means that if you are a 501c3, for instance, which is based on being a charitable organization, you cannot tell people who they should vote for. They can tell you how to vote. They can give you information about voting activities. They can even give you issue information, but they cannot engage with telling you how to vote. So what that does is, if you're only talking to a C3 organization, and by the way, you absolutely should be, you're not getting the full story. You need to be talking and getting information from a variety of sources. C4 organizations can connect you with deeper advocacy and lobbying or issue deep information. They can spend more of their money doing that. C3s can do a little bit, C4s can do all of it. Then PAC organizations are able to help you actually have conversations about the candidates themselves from their point of view. And so I say, the key here is you need to be able to connect the dots. You need to be able to not only make sure you have all the information about how to vote, where to go to vote, and make sure that that vote is protected. You need to understand the issues that are relevant on the ballot, and then you need to be able to connect those issues with the people and measures that appear on the ballot. So when you're thinking about your own civic education, make sure that you're communicating with all kinds of groups, and be intentional about the types of groups as organized under the tax code as possible. That's how they kind of get us. You know what I'm saying? They want, and going back to the money part, they may do a lot of funding, for instance, in a C3 space, but then they don't want you to understand the issue. So the C4 money gets stranglehold, or the PAC money only comes from people who want to fund a specific point of view. So these are things that kind of inhibit speech, which is why it is so important for us to empower you all as individuals, because you're not beholden to those tax codes. So when we give you information and resources and you're empowered to go off and speak, the IRS is not going to come looking for you when you help your network, your friends and family make those connections.
And Holly, if I can just jump in on that, I think that's so important. And this is just really powerful, because you know, Black women, we need to know that we need multiple streams of income, first of all the time, right? But we also need multiple buckets to hold different types of money. So we have 2 C3s and 1 C4. We don't have a pack yet, but we're counting on Holly to do that. And we all work together all the time. You know, this is a small circle of folks that do work on the ground, and it needs to be funded. So why can't we fund our own work? We have vacations, retreats, all kinds of things that we do as Black women. I would suggest that we figure out how to work with our own people, our own community, our own organizations, and say, for the next 3 months or the last 3 months of this election, we're going to do this thing, whether it's knocking on doors, whether it's calling people. Organize yourself. We will give you the tools. We'll give you the literature. We'll give you the list. We'll give you everything that you need. If you want to walk your neighborhood, if you're trying to have a walking club, there are so many things you can do fun in this election that will really make a difference. But we need everybody in the game. Our lives depend on it. Our lives depend on it, and our lives depend on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Panel, anything else before we conclude? All right. Thank you. I want to just say thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. I hope you have found this to be, one, educational, two, enlightening, but more so empowering. We have to, as organizations, bring content and bring information to our communities to help our communities. You know, we're all like a drop of rain. Individually, we can make just a little bit of splash, but when we all gather together, we could wipe out the whole town. We need to start thinking in those terms, and that's how our votes are. That's why they try to pick off our votes one at a time, because there is power in our uniting. We are going to send out to everyone who joined us this evening a copy of Dr. Gamble's presentation. I will also get all of the contact information for our panelists so that you will be able to reach out to them, connect with them, collaborate with them, donate to them, because we have